The dollar that bought freedom. The dust swirled thick as molasses around the makeshift auction platform in the center of Redemption Creek. Jack Sullivan pulled his weathered hat lower over his eyes, watching the crowd of rough men bid on human cargo like they were trading livestock. The sight made his stomach turn, but he'd ridden 3 days to get here for one purpose. "Next up," hollered the auctioneer, a greasy man with gold teeth. "We got ourselves a real prize. Young, healthy, good for all kinds of work." He yanked forward a girl who couldn't have been more than 18, her dress torn and dirt-streaked, but her eyes blazed with a defiance that reminded Jack of a wild Mustang. "Do I hear $50?" the auctioneer called. "50," shouted a man in a bowler hat. "60," countered another. Jack watched the girl's face as the bids climbed. She stood straight despite the chains, her chin raised like she was daring the world to break her. Something in that stance reminded him of his sister Mary, lost to cholera 5 years back. Mary had faced down a grizzly bear with that same look once, protecting their peers' chickens. $100, came a gravelly voice from the back. The crowd turned to see Silas Blackwood, the most feared man in 3 counties. He owned half the territory through methods that didn't bear thinking about. The bidding stopped cold. Nobody crossed Blackwood. 100 going once. $1, Jack called out, his voice cutting through the silence like a church bell. The crowd erupted in laughter. Even Blackwood cracked a yellow smile. "You joking, cowboy?" Jack stepped forward, pulling out a silver dollar and holding it high. $1, cash money. The auctioneer wiped his brow. "Sir, the bid is at 100. "No," Jack interrupted, his hand moving to rest on his Colt .45. "The bid is $1, unless Mr. Blackwood here wants to explain to everyone why he's willing to pay 100 times fair price for what he's calling livestock." The implication hung in the air like gunpowder. Blackwood's hand twitched toward his gun, but Jack was already known as the fastest draw in the territory. More importantly, the crowd was starting to murmur. They might be rough men, but even they had lines they wouldn't cross, and Jack was calling attention to exactly which line Blackwood was fixing to leap over. "Seems to me," Jack continued, his voice carrying across the square, "that any man willing to pay that much for a person might have some particular plans that don't sit right with decent folk." Blackwood's face went purple, but he was trapped. Drawing on Jack would confirm every ugly suspicion, and losing a gunfight would be worse than losing face. "Take your dollar, drifter," Blackwood spat. "But don't think this is over." The auctioneer, eager to avoid bloodshed in his town, quickly gaveled the sale. "Sold to the gentleman for $1. Jack tossed the coin onto the platform and walked up to the girl. She watched him approach with wary eyes, expecting the worst. "Name's Jack Sullivan," he said quietly, producing a key and unlocking her shackles. "And you don't owe me nothing. Matter of fact, you don't owe nothing to no one. Not anymore." The chains hit the ground with a clatter that seemed to echo across the entire square. "I don't understand," she whispered, rubbing her wrists where the iron had chafed them raw. "What's your name?" "Emma. Emma Cartwright." "Well, Miss Cartwright, way I see it, nobody's got the right to own another person. That dollar wasn't buying you, it was buying your freedom back." Emma stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "You're just letting me go? That's the idea." Jack tipped his hat. "You got somewhere to go? Family?" "My family." Emma's voice caught. "Raiders hit our farm 6 months back. Killed my parents, burned everything. I've been passed around since then." Jack felt that familiar rage build in his chest, the same one that had driven him to hunt down the men who'd killed Mary. But this wasn't about vengeance. This was about doing right. "Tell you what," he said, "I got a small spread about a day's ride north of here. Nothing fancy, but it's got 4 walls and a roof. You're welcome to it until you figure out what you want to do next. No strings, no debts. Why would you help me?" Jack glanced back at Blackwood, who was still glowering from across the square. "Because sometimes a man's got to choose what side of the line he stands on." The ride to Jack's ranch took them through the heart of the high desert, past red mesas and through stands of juniper and sage. Emma rode behind him on his horse, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance. She hadn't said much since they'd left town, but Jack could feel the tension slowly leaving her shoulders as they put distance between themselves and that awful auction block. "There," Jack pointed as they crested a small rise. "Home sweet home." The ranch wasn't much to look at. A modest log cabin, a small barn, some corrals, and maybe 50 head of cattle scattered across the scrubland. But the setting sun painted everything golden, and smoke rising from the chimney promised warmth and safety. "You live alone?" Emma asked. "Just me and my horses. Had a partner for a while, but he moved on last spring. Found himself a wife in California." As they approached the cabin, an old hound dog came bounding up, tail wagging like a flag in the wind. "That's Rusty," Jack said, dismounting and helping Emma down. "He's got more bark than bite, but he's good company." Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a simple kitchen and table nearby. A ladder led to a small loft overhead. "You can have the loft," Jack said. "I'll bed down by the fire." Emma looked around the cabin like she was seeing a palace. "I can't take your bed. Already told you you don't owe me nothing. That includes sleeping on the floor." That night, Jack lay on his bedroll by the dying fire, listening to Emma move around in the loft above. He could hear her crying softly, trying to muffle the sound. It broke his heart, but he knew she needed to let it out. Tomorrow would be soon enough to start figuring out what came next. Emma proved to be a quick learner and harder worker than any hand Jack had ever hired. Within a week, she was helping with the cattle, mending fences, and cooking meals that made Jack remember what it was like to eat something besides beans and hardtack. "You don't have to work so hard," he told her one evening as she served up a plate of stew that actually had vegetables in it. "This is supposed to be a place to rest and heal. Keeping busy helps," she replied, settling across from him at the table. "Besides, I like the work, it's honest." They ate in comfortable silence for a while before Emma spoke again. "Jack, what you did back in town, was that really just about doing right?" Jack set down his spoon and considered the question. "You remind me of someone I lost, my sister Mary. She had your same fire, your same way of standing up to the world even when it was kicking you down. What happened to her? Cholera, 5 years back. I was away on a cattle drive, making money to expand the ranch. When I got back," Jack's voice trailed off, "I always wondered if I could have done something different, saved her somehow." Emma reached across the table and touched his hand briefly. "You can't save people from sickness, Jack, but you can save them from cruelty. That's what you did for me." Word of the auction incident spread quickly through the territory. Some folks called Jack a hero. Others said he was a fool who'd made an enemy of the wrong man. Jack didn't much care about public opinion, but he did care about Emma's safety. That's why he wasn't surprised when Blackwood and 6 of his men rode up to the ranch on a Tuesday morning while Jack was breaking a new horse in the corral. "Sullivan," Blackwood called from horseback, "we need to talk." Jack finished his work with the horse and walked over to the fence, his hand resting casually on his gun. Emma emerged from the cabin, a rifle in her hands. "Seems like you got something to say, Blackwood. Say it. The girl belongs to me. You interfered with a legal transaction. Last I checked, slavery was illegal in this territory. She's an indentured servant. Owes debts to some people in Denver. I was doing them a favor." Jack studied Blackwood's face and saw the lie written there, plain as day. "That's so. You got papers proving these debts?" Blackwood's jaw worked like he was chewing leather. "Papers get lost. How convenient." Jack stepped away from the fence, giving himself room to draw. "Here's what I think happened. I think you've been running a slave operation through that auction house, preying on folks who can't defend themselves. I think when I called you out, I made you look weak in front of your buyers. You made a mistake, Sullivan. Maybe, but I'm still breathing, which means I haven't made my last mistake yet." The tension stretched taut as a violin string. 6 guns against 2, but Jack had the advantage of position and speed. More importantly, he had something worth fighting for. "This doesn't end here," Blackwood finally said, pulling his horse around. "No," Jack agreed. "I don't reckon it does." After they rode off, Emma lowered her rifle. "They'll be back. Probably. This is my fight, Jack. You don't have to. Like hell." Jack turned to face her. "Day I let a man like Blackwood intimidate me off my own land is the day I turn in my spurs." They came 3 nights later, thinking darkness would give them an advantage. They were wrong. Jack had spent 2 years tracking Apaches through these mountains during his army days. He knew every rock, every shadow, every sound the desert made at night. When 12 men tried to surround his cabin, he picked them off one by one from positions they never saw coming. Emma proved herself handy with a rifle too, covering the cabin's windows while Jack worked his way around their perimeter. By dawn, 7 of Blackwood's men were dead or wounded, and the rest were in full retreat. Blackwood himself took a bullet in the shoulder as he fled, screaming threats about bringing the army down on them. "Let him," Jack said, reloading his Winchester. "I still got friends in the territorial government. Time they knew what Blackwood's been up to." The investigation that followed brought federal marshals to Redemption Creek. They found evidence of Blackwood's operation, forged debt papers, correspondence with buyers across 3 territories, and a list of transactions that made even hardened lawmen sick. Blackwood was arrested and sentenced to hang. His network was dismantled, and more than 30 people were freed from various forms of bondage across the territory. "You started something that day at the auction," Marshal Crawford told Jack. "Something important." Spring came early that year, painting the desert in wildflowers and new grass. Jack was mending a fence when Emma approached, a serious expression on her face. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what comes next." Jack felt his heart sink a little. He'd known this day would come, when Emma would want to move on with her life. She was young and smart, and deserved better than a small ranch in the middle of nowhere. "Whatever you decide, you got my support," he said. "I want to buy into the ranch. Become your partner." Jack nearly dropped his hammer. "Emma, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." She met his eyes. "This place feels like home. The work feels right, and," she blushed slightly, "I'd like to stay, if you'll have me."
Jack grinned, the first real smile he'd worn in months. "Well, we'll have to work out terms. What kind of investment you thinking about making?" Emma pulled a silver dollar from her pocket, the same dollar Jack had used to buy her freedom at the auction. "How about this? Seems like it's got some lucky magic to it." Jack laughed and shook her hand. "Deal. Equal partners, equal say in all decisions. And equal work," Emma added. "Wouldn't have it any other way." 2 years later, the Sullivan Cartwright Ranch was one of the most prosperous spreads in the territory. They'd expanded their herd, built a new barn, and taken on 3 steady hands. Emma had proven herself not just a capable rancher, but a shrewd businesswoman, negotiating deals that left buyers thinking they'd gotten the better end while padding the ranch's profits. More importantly to Jack, she'd never lost that fierce independence that had first caught his attention at the auction. She was his partner in every sense, working beside him during the day, planning for the future by lamplight in the evenings. They were sitting on the porch one sunset, watching their cattle graze in the distance, when Emma brought up the subject that had been dancing around them for months. "Jack, that dollar I used to buy into the ranch, what about it? You think it might work a third time? For something else?" Jack looked at her, seeing the question in her eyes that she wasn't quite ready to ask out loud. "Depends what you had in mind." Emma stood and walked to the porch railing, looking out at the land they'd built together. "I was thinking, maybe it could buy me a new name. Emma Sullivan has a nice ring to it." Jack rose and stood beside her, his heart hammering like a smithy's anvil. "You asking what I think you're asking?" "Depends. You interested in what I think I'm asking?" Jack turned to face her, taking her hands in his calloused ones. "Emma Cartwright, you've been free since the day I met you, but if you're willing, I'd be honored to share that freedom with you." She kissed him then, there on the porch with the desert painted gold around them and their cattle lowing in the distance. "So," Jack said when they finally broke apart, "what do you say we make this official? I hear there's a preacher in town who owes me a favor." Emma laughed, the sound carrying across the rangeland like music. "Just promise me one thing, anything. When we tell this story to our children someday, make sure they understand that $1 didn't buy me. It bought me the chance to choose my own life. And what did you choose?" Emma looked around at the ranch they'd built, at the life they'd carved out of the unforgiving frontier through hard work and stubbornness and love. "I chose home," she said. "And I chose you." Jack kissed her again, tasting the promise of all their tomorrows. That night, as they sat by the fire planning their wedding, Emma pulled out the silver dollar one more time. "Think this old coin has any magic left in it?" she asked. Jack took it, feeling the weight of all the changes that single piece of silver had brought to their lives. "Tell you what, let's save it for our first child. Maybe it'll bring them the same kind of luck it brought us." "What kind of luck is that?" Jack looked at this remarkable woman who'd become his partner, his equal, his heart's companion, and smiled. "The kind that helps you find exactly where you belong." Outside, the desert wind carried the scent of sage and possibility, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled at the stars, a wild, free sound that spoke of endless horizons and second chances. Emma Sullivan to be smiled and tucked the dollar away for the future, knowing that sometimes the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold, only chosen with an open heart and the courage to believe in tomorrow. The end.